going on, ladies and gentlemen? It's the one and only James Williams of the Dark Waters channel. And I'm here for Bigfoot weekend. Now, if you've been listening so far, at this point in time, guys, you've got a plethora of content. We should be heading into right now the live phone calls where we get opinions from the audience on very important topics. We're gonna, encounters are fine, and I know you guys have heard some encounters, but there's a call-in show for Bigfoot encounters and Dogman encounters. But then there's a call-in show that's next. That's for how we as a community gel around researchers, cryptozoologists to help fund their research. And then there's going to be many more conversations. Today, I have Dr. Bill Hewitt with me, and we're going to have a discussion from his perspective of some of the things that can be done, have been done, and should be done as it pertains to the cryptid community and the subject of Bigfoot. Dr. Bill, thank you for joining me. If you don't mind, I know my audience may not be super familiar with you. Walk us through a little bit about your background history, how long you've been in this topic, and how you got interested in it in the first place.
Okay, I guess my interest starts probably 30 or 40 years ago, but just doing a little reading. There wasn't much around. So over the years, I just kind of kept an eye on it and hoped that one day I would move to an area where I would see something and would be able to do some research, but that never happened. And finally, when I retired, I moved to Florida. However, I wasn't aware that there were any in Florida at the time. So my thoughts were just, keep reading it, keep studying a little bit, but never going to see one. So after I was down here a bit, I accidentally stumbled on some information that made me realize they are here. So at some point I started doing some hiking with it and some camping and getting out into the woods probably 2-3 days a week. Retired, so I had the time, and started seeing a few clues and little evidence here and there. And at some point in time, I decided that it would be nice to have a little more education in it, and again, accidentally stumbled upon a university that taught it. So I went back to school and got my PhD in cryptozoology. That really kind of opened it up for me. Then I started spending more and more time in the bush. And to this date, now that was probably 12 years ago, I started really doing it seriously. And to this date, I've had 2 sightings. So I consider myself very, very lucky.
Nah, that's awesome. So you actually took it to the point to where you wanted to study it and you went back to school for it. That's an awesome thing. From having that educational standpoint of having a cryptozoology degree and then looking at the evidence that's been gathered and presented so far, are you of the mindset that, and I know you've seen it, so how do you articulate it to someone when someone asks the question of you, well, is this Bigfoot phenomenon real? How do you answer that question from someone from your standpoint? I would say like a skeptic or a non-believer. How do you address it?
Well, the non-believers are pretty much impossible. I haven't been able to get through to any non-believer, but the skeptics, they seem to pay a little attention, and I show them my reports on it that I made to the research group that I belong to one of them. And from there, they seem to have, at least gather a little more interest in it. I can't guarantee I get through to everybody, but I sure try. Yeah.
And I think the reason why I asked that question is because there's a number of people who truly believe in this topic, but they have family members and friends who don't necessarily believe in it. And so a lot of the witnesses that I talk to, one of the problems they're presented with is, okay, I saw something weird, I saw something strange, I saw a Bigfoot, or I saw what I believe to be a dog man. I want to explain to my family members what I saw, and they get that ridicule and that rejection. And I was just wondering, from your perspective, what would be a talking point to explain things to somebody who had an issue with family members or friends? But it sounds to me like you're saying it's best to actually let them see documentation. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I think that's a start. I send them, for one thing, to ISRTUSA.com website, which is one of the groups I belong to. And it is so full of encounters and reports and everything that it gives them a place to really view things, and then they see my 2 reports on there, and they can ask me all the questions. I give them my contact information and explain that sometimes when you're hearing and seeing things in the bush and you don't know what they are, sometimes it's important. And when they get a chance to explain things to me that they have seen, then usually they get a little more insight into it.
No, I'm with you. And did you have any interest in this topic when you were a kid, like a very young kid, or was this something that just, as you be matured as into an adult, you took an interest in it? I mean, were you aware of the possibility that this existed as a young child?
I was aware of it as far back as high school, but again, like I say, there was really no information, and if you really talked to anybody about it, you were pretty weird. So I let it go at that most of the time, but I kept an interest all those years.
Today, if you talk about it, you're pretty weird. So I don't think that's changed much. I went out to dinner recently with some friends, and so one of the guys actually said, "What do you do for a living?" Well, I said, "I have a YouTube channel. I have a series of YouTube channels." And I was explaining to him what I do, and he just kind of looked at me like I was crazy. And I said, "Well, I can understand the apprehension." He's like, "Well, you believe that stuff?" I said, "Yeah, I believe it. What are you talking about?" "Well, that can't be real." I said, "Oh, it's very real." And he's an outdoorsman, spends a lot of time hunting hogs, and he says he's never experienced anything. But get this, Dr. Bill. So I started asking him little small questions. Well, okay, you believe you haven't experienced anything. Have you ever been out in the middle of the woods and felt like something was watching you? Yeah, well, I feel that all the time. I said, have you been out in the woods and something threw sticks or rocks at you? And he starts to get quiet. I said, have you ever been in a hog hunting area where there's a lot of hogs and you've seen like structures where it looks like trees had fallen and created giant X's? And he gets even more quiet. I said, uh-huh. I said, so you don't know what you're looking at, as opposed to saying that you've never experienced anything. You don't really understand what you're looking at. And sometimes it seems to me that the average individual, especially an outdoorsman, it takes a lot to go into the woods in the first place in the night in the dark, or just spend time in the woods. It takes a certain type of intestinal fortitude to do that. But then you combine the fact that they're out there and they don't have the necessary information. I think once they start coming across it and you start explaining it to them, now they're presented with a choice. Do they want the context of their mind to remain the same, or do they want to expand that context? And the threat is, can I go back out into the woods again with this knowledge and understand that there may be something else out there other than me, something more that can hurt me, you know?
Correct. Yeah, there's a lot of that. And I try to explain some of that to people when I meet them. And I meet some interesting people in the campgrounds, a lot of them from mountainous areas and, Kentucky, Tennessee, and that. And once I do that and explain, well, have you ever heard this? And have you ever heard that? And I can see it in their eyes. I've caught their interest, and they really start to listen, and they want to go back home and watch more carefully.
And that's what we have to do. I think, and I've said this before. I think one of the things that this field, researchers, investigators, which I kind of make a distinction between those two. A researcher for me is somebody who's out in the field that actually produces a document that can be kind of duplicated to hand out to people. You know what I'm saying? That's a real researcher. Investigator can kind of fall into anybody, somebody who watches YouTube videos or looks at Facebook posts. They're kind of investigating a topic. But as it pertains to researchers, it seems like as a group, we are looking for the approval of mainstream institutions for the work that we produce. And I don't know if we'll ever get that. Like, you're a cryptozoologist. I'm pretty sure you've talked to other people in your field. And I've talked to a number of cryptozoologists recently. And how is it perceived from the larger scientific community when you deal with those people? Are they kind of open to it? Are they snickering? How does that work with the larger scientific community when you engage with them, or do you engage with them?
I don't really engage with them very much. I do see some of them at the conferences, but I only do local conferences. And anyone else who's actually a cryptozoologist. Of course, we're one-on-one with each other, and it's good conversation, and everyone understands that they are real. But there's always a few skeptics around, and I try to convert them, but I don't go overboard with it. I just present information, and when I do a conference, or at least set up at the table at a conference, I have an album I put together with all sorts of pictures of my evidence along the way. So that way, at least the people have questions, I can show them, well, this is the print from an experience I had where I saw one, and we went back and printed it the next morning, and so on and so forth. So I give them some evidence and let them think for themselves.
All right, I'm gonna pose a question to you. All right, here we go. So if you had an unlimited budget, right, like a dream budget, and your goal was to get knowledge of this topic out to the masses, what would you do if you had an unlimited budget?
Oh, that's a very good question. I don't know. Other than conferences, I really don't know of a good way to get this out there. That's something I would be interested in doing, but again, like you say, it's an imaginary, unlimited budget, and I don't know where that would go, to be honest.
I'm with you, and the reason why I asked that question is because when I ask that question of other researchers and field investigators, the concept never crosses their mind what they would do with an unlimited budget. Well, we already know that there's all kinds of research, funded research that does have unlimited budgets, right? You know, virology has budgets that are insane. Defense has budgets that are absolutely insane. And the reason why I ask people that question is because I want to kind of inject that into their mind, because there is money out there. It's just that nobody actually looks for the money for the research. There's ways to fund the research. They don't really dig into it and look for it. There's a lot of forestry grants out there. And for example, I saw a grant that a young lady sent across my desk 2 weeks ago. This was the study in Louisiana. The grant was to study the nutria rat population, right? Okay. And she was like, James, there's a grant to study the nutria rat population and how it's growing. And she's like, you can take this funding and you can study nutria rats, and you can use that same funding to do other things while you're out in the field. And I was like, yeah, I'm not really the one to be going out in the field. And she was like, well, maybe you should talk to one of your people for the funding here in Louisiana. And I was like, all right, cool. I'll see what we can do. But there's funding out there that you may have to kind of double up and do a little bit extra work, but there's funding sources there. But it seems to me, Doc, like there's this box that we found ourselves in this community that nobody's willing to like kick the side of the box out or cut a hole in it or poke a hole in it. And we all can stay confined to the same mindset of there's nothing more I can do than what I'm doing now. There's no genuine innovation in the thought process. And that's what I want to kind of have conversations with people about.
Well, I kind of agree with that. Trouble is, for example, in my case, I don't know how to go about getting funding or where to look. So that really limits me.
Right. So, and I can tell you what, I'm gonna try my best to get her to just do an interview on grant funding, and how people get research grants for field research. And the craziest thing is, it's not going to say it's a grant to research Bigfoot. It may be to research, an endangered frog. It may be whatever. But what it will do is it'll put you in the field and where you're looking for one species where you may run across another species. And as long as you fulfill your grant, then there's no issue. The issue is when you don't fulfill the stipulations of that grant. But I'm going to try and have her on to have that discussion. But these are the kind of things I just want to inject into the conversation because it's there to be done. It's just that nobody's talking about doing it. Nobody's trying to figure out innovative ways to do it. I guess the next question I would have for you would be, I'm struggling with this. You've been in this field for 30 years, and I'm really struggling mentally with Like, what would be the end game? Like, what's your end game, right, Doc? Like, you've been in the field 30 years. I've seen where you've got footprint, you got like castings of footprints. We know you had your 2 encounters. And by the way, whenever you want to share those encounters, I would love to hear what you saw.
Oh,
Like, what would be the end game for people in this field? Like, what's your end game? Like, when do you say, okay, I've gathered enough evidence, you know, um, I'm convinced? Because everybody I talk to, they're like, well, I don't have an end game, you know? And it's like, if you don't know if you don't have a goal in mind when you start something, then there's really no plan. You're just kind of wandering along, going about your business, um, and nothing ever truly manifests if you don't have a target to hit. Am I making sense to you?
yes, it does actually. Um, I guess my end game is to see them protected for one thing, but to gather up a lot more information about them, and to get rid of all the incorrect thoughts and all the things that are hidden from us about them. Uh, I would like to see us make more contact with them. Not going to be easy, and as far as when I'm satisfied with what I got, I don't know if that'll ever happen. I want to go till the end, till as long as I can on it.
Right. I got you. And that's, it's amazing because that's a lot of people's mindset. And there's nothing wrong with it. I
Mhm.
talked to a number of researchers like, man, I want to do this the rest of my life. They really, really enjoy doing this. Um, like I was talking to a gentleman, this was 2 weeks ago. And this was, how you have the interview and you have the after interview conversation, right? We're talking about, he said he wanted to actually, get a closer experience to them. His dream was to actually hand one an apple. So he's like, I want to be able to hold my hand out and take the apple out of my hand. And my question was, how do you go about doing that? And he was like, well, I'm just going to keep on going into the area until, I reach a point to where I build a relationship. And I asked him, what did that look like? What does it building a relationship with them look like? But he couldn't articulate it. He couldn't articulate what that building a relationship looked like. And so I said, well, does it look like you going out into the woods and actually living in the woods among them? Is that what it looks like? He's like, nah, I don't think I'm gonna do that. You know what I'm saying? And so it's, for me, I'm just I'm trying to figure out what has to be put together to achieve that goal, those goals of getting it out to the masses. Um, and in my mind, after it's gotten out to the masses, will the masses even care at this point in time? Like right now, Doc, we got CNN talking about UFOs, right? And to me, it's like when UFOs are on CNN, then everybody and mama know you don't need to be paying attention to a UFO. But nonetheless, it seems like all the institutions that would be trusted to disseminate information to the people, they're no longer trusted anymore based on everything that's going on in the world. And so I don't know. It's hard for me to figure out what an overall end game would be and how you present the information and who you present it to because of the state of the world. Am I making sense to you?
It makes a lot of sense, actually. That's what becomes so difficult about this. It's like the old saying, everything in our favor is against us,
Yes.
Yes. I think that when we find a hot spot, an area where we know they're in, I also will not ever go live there, but I do think that we need to be there probably 3 or 4 times a week and make ourselves available, make sure they're watching us, act accordingly, leave a little food for them. Don't carry a rifle, don't carry a shotgun, because they're not stupid. They know what guns are. We don't want to make them afraid or make them leery of us, but I think we just have to interact with them as much as possible, even if we don't really see them.
I got you.
That's kind of my feeling on it right now.
And from your, just circle back on this, just because this is for me as I try and plot out for the rest of the content for this weekend. I mean, do you think the overall consensus is that the majority of the researchers don't know where they would go get funding from, or they don't have the experience in how to go about chasing down that funding? Or do you think that it's just from your 30 years, when you look back over the 30 years you've been in this field, do you think it's a lack of knowledge that leads to the lack of funding for the research, or is it the overall perception that like acquiring financing or funding for research is a negative thing in the field, or is perceived as negatively?
No, I think it's definitely a lack of knowledge on how to do it. I mean, in the two groups I belong to, we talk about it now and then, but it's everybody's dream, but no one says anything more about it because I don't believe anyone knows how.
Okay, awesome, awesome. And I want you to know something, Doc. Like what you're saying weighs heavily to me as a man who's worked in politics and dealt with like nonprofit funding. I sit on the board for a couple of nonprofits in New Orleans right now. It weighs heavily on me because when I talk to other people in the field, it seems like there's been this I call it monetization, but anti-funding of research. It's kind of like there's been this perception that people who've had their research funded, whether it be through crowdsource funding or whether it be through building an audience, it's almost been in my mind like people presented it like that made them be inauthentic, like they were a fraud or they were fake because there was funding involved. And I really struggled with that, Doc, because for me, like I graduated with a degree in electrical engineer, a minor in physics, worked for the Department of Defense, Space and Strategic Defense Command. I've worked for Ericsson Telecommunications, Energy of New Orleans, where I build transmission lines. My brain has yet to be able to wrap around the mindset of you want to achieve a goal, you want to get something out to the masses, but then the perception is if you actually pursue funding to do that, then it's like upside down world. If you pursue funding to do it, then it makes you inauthentic and you're not accepted by the community. So what you're telling me really, really means a lot because I know you've been around a long time. You're very well respected and it weighs heavily. And it leads me down the path of saying, okay, if it's a knowledge issue where people don't have the knowledge, that's a very, very easy solution. It's really just a matter of bringing people into a conversation that can share that knowledge and resources there that'll say, nah, this is how you build how you write a grant proposal. This is how you find these grants. This is what your team needs to look like. So for example, you being a cryptozoologist, I'm pretty sure you know a zoologist, and you can easily put together a team of people that would fit the mold for going into the field to search for any species that they're trying to research. But simultaneously, while you're there, you go into an environment where there's Bigfoot, but you got to do your other research. But you have the credentials to do it, and that's 90% of the problem when it comes to getting grant funding for anything. How the team is presented. So you can't say you're going to do grant funding for AIDS research and you don't have a virologist on your team. So they're going to say, well, how are you going to research, human immune deficiency syndrome if you don't have anybody who understands viruses? But as it pertains to being a field researcher and doing any kind of research in the field that deals with species, whether known or unknown, the background history, the educational history lines the people up that it lines you up to get that funding. And I guess it's just a matter of bringing the resources in. So I want you to understand, this conversation really helps me because I was getting discouraged with the fact that working in this field, I'm seeing this mindset that's just anti-success in any way. And I don't mean success like monetary. I mean like success in achieving the goal of an end result. I couldn't fathom it. All right. With that being said, walk us through your encounters and how you felt and when you had them, if you don't mind.
Okay. My first encounter was in Palm Beach County, of all places. They seem to be around, as we all know now, wherever there's a lot of people. And it was just a few years ago, 3, 4, 5 years ago. We had been going at night to a specific area and sitting there with our night vision and our thermals and watching and waiting for something to come in. And we had done that for several years there. And this one particular night, uh, we're distracted by a pair of glowing eyes down near the ground, though, which was a strange thing. So my partner, Bigfoot Dave Miller, he tells me to turn and look to his left, and he says, I see some eyes in there, and this is really strange. And they were huge eyes picking up the light, the infrared light. And it would walk several steps and then lay down on its belly again and do it again and again and again. And it was getting closer and closer. And we were starting to think we were the target. And finally, it turned sideways, and we could see it was just a bobcat, and it was after a rabbit. So, okay, we didn't take our eyes off it for a while, though, because we didn't know what was going to happen. Finally, they ran off. So we said, okay, turn our cameras back to where we were looking. And Dave said, what's that noise? And I listened, and I said, I hear the ground shaking. And he said, yeah, I hear big footsteps. So we started swinging the instruments around, and pretty soon he picks up a Bigfoot walking on his thermal. And I swung my night vision around, and by that time it stepped behind a tree, like a double tree in the shape of a V. And it turns out he was standing behind the tree exactly 30 feet from us, and he was watching us look for him. So at first, you get those crazy thoughts like, is this real? How did that get there? But it was perfectly still for at least 30 seconds. And during that time, it allowed me to move my night vision up and down slowly on its body. So I got to see every detail, right from not a cone head, but a ridge head with several nubs sticking out, 3 or 4 nubs on each side. The hair, fairly hairy face, and it was 3-4 inches hair all over it. I got to see and study the shoulders. They were a good 3.5 feet wide. And from there down, I saw the chest. I went down to the arms. The arms were very, very long and very skinny compared to the rest of its body, and the hands. Now the hands, when I got to them, the fingers were at least as long as from your fingertip to your wrist. So they were a good 8, 9, 10 inches long. They were just absolutely incredible. And the one hand he had wrapped around the tree, I got to study the details of his fingers, and they had nails exactly like ours, except that they're black, totally dark, dark black. So there, when I went down to the legs, I got to study the legs a bit down to just above the ankle, because he was behind a tree and a little bit of earth, so I didn't get to see the feet. But then I slowly brought it back up, and I studied his face. He had very dark, I don't know if I want to say dark brown or black pupils, very hard to tell, but he had whites of his eyes around his eyeballs. And since Dave was probably 8 or 10 feet to my left, the only part of this creature that moved were his eyes. And you could see his eyes would look over at Dave, and then they would look back at me. Then they look at Dave, then they look back at me. And he kept this up the whole time. And then finally, after close to 30 seconds, I suddenly realized that I didn't record. And to this day, I don't understand why I didn't, whether it's something he controlled or whether I was just too excited and didn't think of it. But I moved the index finger on my right hand no more than 1 inch to the record button, and he vanished immediately. So I didn't quite understand what happened there. I don't know if he moved faster than the shutter speed of my camera, or he, ducked and ran, and I don't know what happened, but somehow I was not able to get a recording of him. And I've been a professional photographer, videographer for at least 55 years. So wasn't my first rodeo, but I sure screwed up.
I understand, but you know, it's one of those things where you're in shock like that, man. People don't like listeners don't understand. It seems like when you're in that situation, the furthest thing from your mind, because when I found myself in that situation, I had a camera phone in my pocket. The furthest thing from my mind was pulling out a camera or pulling out my phone or even taking a
Mhm.
picture. It just didn't cross my mind. Um, so I don't think it's anything to feel bad about. What about your second time you saw one?
Well, the second time was in Sarasota County here in Florida. And again, it was late at night, and we were under a pavilion looking at some swing sets. And we had been in that area checking out footprints for months. Every time we got a chance to get out there, we would, and every night we'd go there and sit with the night vision and thermal and everything. And there was two swing sets, a couple slides, some monkey bars, and it was there for the kids of families who use the pavilion for picnics. And so it's a good spot at night. Nobody's there. All of a sudden, a 4 foot tall adolescent pops into the picture. I mean, just instantly is there. But he's all dressed in black. And I hear Dave and my wife say, "You see that?" And I say, "Yes, I see them. I see it, but I don't know what it is." And then another few seconds goes by, and a 5 footer, almost 5 footer, pops into the scene too. And it's on a piece of land that it's triangular in shape. And if you wander in the pitch black, if you wander too far to the right, you fall down a 10-foot embankment into alligator infested water. And on the other side is very thick forest that a human can't walk through. And on our side, of course, it was a pavilion. So we don't really know where they came from. But all of a sudden, they're there. And unfortunately for us, thinking like parents instead of researchers, we were kind of verbally whispering and beating up the parents, saying, you know, what's the matter with people? Let their kids out this late at night. They're all dressed in dark clothes. They got no reflective. They got no flashlights. They're, you know, we're just completely down the wrong rabbit hole.
Right.
So then before we know it, one of them goes over and jumps on the swing. And he pushed once. You know, remember when you're kids and you push the swing back and forth until you're horizontal?
Right.
He pushed once and he was horizontal. And I'm going, wow, this is a strong kid. You know, like, what am I seeing here? This is all happening so fast, you know. So the other kid, he's just standing there waiting. And after this, the one swung back and forth a couple times, he did what we did as kids do. He jumped off the swing. He landed back at his brother. And my wife and Dave both heard them start talking. And it was like a samurai gibberish. And unfortunately, I needed hearing aids at the time and I didn't have them, so I missed it. But they talked for a minute and then they both disappeared back into the forest and it was all over. So,
that's a hell of a sighting, man. That's one hell of a sighting. That really is one hell of a sighting.
That's what I thought, but you know what? We still didn't catch on to it. And when we're trying to discuss it after on the ride back to the campsite, and we're saying, well, you know, it's 89 degrees out tonight. Why would they have a heavy coat and heavy leggings on? Doesn't make sense. So we're still not catching it. And finally I said, you know what? I had a really good look and those weren't dressed in coat and pants. They were wearing a one-piece jumpsuit. And as soon as I did that, or as soon as I said that, it all hit me. And I said, oh my God, we just had a sighting.
I mean, you guys had one hell of a sighting. I mean, they swing on swing.
You never get to see their children, you know?
No, you never get to see. Only people I know that are researchers that see their children, they really go into the nursing areas. And that's a very dangerous thing to do. They end up wandering into a nursery area. They see the children, and most of the time, the children or an adult escorts them out of there relatively quickly, you know, by making noises and forcing them to follow them out of there or herding them out of there. So, man, that's one hell of a sighting.
It was. It really impressed us. Once we, halfway back to the 6 mile drive back to the campsite, we had it all figured out. But we got back and it was past midnight. All the other campers were in bed. We were kind of wound up, so we sat under the canopy of the trailer and debriefed a little. And I'm just kind of sitting there staring into the black, into the woods, and a stone comes flying out. And if I hadn't been looking that way, I wouldn't have seen it. But it came straight out, it bounced once and hit my partner in the knee. So I thought, well,
wow.
Yeah, I thought, at first he said, well, what are you doing? I said, well, that wasn't me. That was somebody in the woods. And we put a light out there immediately, but of course you wouldn't see anything. And then probably another 5 or 10 minutes went by and somebody tapped Dave on the shoulder real hard, tapped him on the shoulder, and he turned around, but there was nobody there.
Yeah, that's getting up close and personal. And this is away from where you saw them on the swing then, right?
I think it's exactly 6 miles.
Yeah, that's cool.
So let's say 3 to 6 miles in that area. Yeah, we had to drive to it. So something followed us back. Had to mess with us a little.
Yeah, it's like, okay, you guys can't. And the craziest thing is, in my mind, let's just run with the theory that they were either they communicated about where you followed you guys while you're riding in a vehicle back 6 miles, or there was some long range communication that happened and say, hey, these guys were just over here messing around in our play yard. Go over there and tell them something, Right. Either way it goes, it's still absolutely fascinating that something like that could happen.
Well,
it really is.
Yeah, they had no trouble finding us. I mean, they knew there's probably 10 to 15 campsites in that little circle, and they went right to us. So.
No, that's super duper cool. You mentioned your wife. How long has your wife been interested in the topic of Bigfoot? Is this something that you guys have been doing together for a long time, like researching?
We both got into it the actual research part about 12 years ago here in Florida. And so she comes out with me. She still works, so once in a while she can't make it, but whenever she does, she's out there with me.
And the reason why I asked that question, and I'm not being a creeper asking about your wife, it's just that it's documented that when there's a female presence, the activity is different. Have you guys experienced an increase of activity when she's around as opposed to when it's just the guys around?
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. We've had some experiences where we were within 50 yards of each other, and she was getting audio, if you want to call audio sightings. And the one time she was up on a swing bridge, and probably 25 feet, and I was another probably 50, 60 feet up on the tower. Well, I heard nothing up there, but she was on the swing bridge. Another one of my colleagues was on the swing bridge at the other end, and they both heard what they thought, and I believe it, what they thought was large exhalations from a Bigfoot and squealing from a hog. And every time the hog squealed, you heard, and it lasted 2 or 3 times, and then there were no more squeals. So I think somebody got dinner.
Yeah, somebody got their dinner. They definitely got a little bite to eat. They took a snack that day.
Yeah, and that was, I'm sorry. That was probably only 50 feet from them, but it was, again, across a little trail and into the bush part.
The most frightening thing to me about the Bigfoot encounters is how close they're able to get up on researchers without the person, unbeknownst to the person, how close they're able to get. The closest that I've heard is 10 feet away, where something stood up next to a researcher 10 feet away and in the brush and scared the living crap out of them. And it's just amazing how they're able to move like that. And it's that spider crawl that they do. And it's just stealthy and quiet. There was a guy who told me his eyewitness encounter out of the Honey Island swamp. And he went fishing at night, and he was in his boat. He was on the right-hand side of the swamp, and he heard something moving in the bushes. off to his right on land, but he's in the water. And by the time he realized, he thought the sound was further away. By the time he actually realized that it was and got the eye shine, it was less than 5 feet away from him as an eyewitness,
Wow.
and freaked him the hell out to the point to where he almost fell out of the boat trying to get out of there. So I mean, it's amazing how stealthy they are, and that's why I tell people all the time, as it pertains to Bigfoot, I really think you got to kind of lean on the side that if they really was like the evil bad guys who wanted to destroy the world, they could easily do it. You know, something about them they don't want to.
Right.
You gotta break a whole bunch of rules for them to just wild out and do you something. You know.
Right. For them to want to go that far. I think they're very tolerant. And I think the only thing about my encounters that later I thought was frightening was on the first one with that 7.5 footer, when he disappeared, I felt no fear. It was only interest, and I really wanted a picture. And I gathered up my tripod and my night vision, and I started going after him to get a picture. And Dave stopped me. He said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I got to get a picture." And then he kind of brought me back to reality. And I said, "Oh, yeah, bad idea." But I didn't feel the fear for some reason.
Yeah, that's a terrible idea. You don't need to be running chasing them down. I tell
No.
you, Doc, we did. We had a little camera project set up where we had live streaming cameras, and it was on a property that had verifiable Bigfoot activity.
Mhm.
And one of this young lady named Wendy Wilson, who has a lot of activity on her property. I mean, like she has activity every day, and she posts pictures daily of these things on her property. She pulled the clip off the live stream camera, and she was trying to explain to me how fast these things move. And so she calls me at like 1 o'clock in the morning. She's like, "James, are you awake?" I'm like, barely." She says, "I need you to look at this clip, and I want you to see this thing run across the open field." And I'm like, "Okay." So she sends me the clip, and I hit play. And you see what looks like a little blur go across the camera. She says, "Okay, now slow it down." So I slow it down, and you see like a figure. It's bounding across the field of vision of the camera. And she says, "Slow it down again." I said, "Well, I don't have any way of slowing it down any more than this." She says, "If you go frame by frame, you will see it." And so I sent it off to a guy through fiverr.com to get it analyzed. And I think it was the second day, he text messaged me back. He says, "Hey, what is this thing jumping across the screen?" And the way he described it was like laying its body out, this flat out, and then bringing its legs and his feet together, and then leaping out in the air and coming across the screen. And so when he finally sent it back to me, I was like, "Holy crap, this is crazy." That's one of them moving across the screen. But I never put that piece out. I put another piece of evidence out because I was like, whatever, we're going to see how people react to this one, which was a giant face, like the head moving across the screen, and everybody went crazy. It was like it's fake. So I said, I'm just going to hold it for my private collection. But it's amazing how fast these things are when they actually start to move. So I could see one legit running, and chasing you guys for 6 miles in a car with no problem. Like, I can see them legit following you for 6 miles. No issue, no problem. You not seeing it. It just running alongside the road or running alongside the woods chasing you.
I agree. I have no problem believing they're that fast and they could do that. I mean, to us, there was no other explanation other than being followed back.
Yeah, and again, that adds to the fright of them. I don't know. I just want, me personally, I'm at a point now where I feel like I've been in this field enough, in the cryptid field itself long enough. I've seen the problems that present themselves to researchers. I see the problems that present themselves to witnesses, eyewitnesses. And I guess it's my engineering mind, Doc, that says, okay, there's got to be a solution to these problems. And I think as you solve the underlying problems that present themselves, then the community as a whole actually achieves like individual goals and a collective goal. Like if the eyewitnesses are able to actually submit encounters to an environment where their encounters are not necessarily the way encounters are treated fairly, where there's like an environment where they're treated to where they're respected, where they're not afraid or they're not ridiculed, then you have more data come to the forefront. And you'll be able to extract data out of those encounters and then kind of correlate it and say, okay, this is what eyewitnesses are saying. This is what field researchers are saying. Those are two forms of evidence. You combine video and audio evidence, and across the board, you got enough to build a case for the existence of anything. And it's like we have all these different forms of evidence. It's just that they're, what's the word I'm looking for? They're it's like these buckets of evidence, compartmentalized, right? It's
Right.
compartmentalized in the environment of, okay, this guy has a encounter where that witness tells his encounter. Then it's compartmentalized in the form of, there's a field researcher who has prints and this and that and hair samples. And then it's compartmentalized in a knowledge base of, people who talk to eyewitnesses. But there's no like the bucket's never empty into like a giant pool where somebody could come and say, all right, this is the truth. And I think that's the overall problem with this field. Everything is so compartmentalized that it never combines to like paint the perfect picture for anybody to look at. That's undeniable.
I agree with that. There's too much secrecy going on. People talk about sharing, but when it comes down to it, they really don't. They want to keep what they have and get whatever they can out of it, whether it's glory or whatever. Very hard to get people to actually tell you everything and or anything some days, and get it all together.
And that is the problem. And that's the thing that has to be addressed, and that's the issue that has to be tackled. And I think once that one's tackled, which is it's a huge issue, but that's what has to be tackled in order for this to break loose. And once it's tackled, I believe that we'll see for example, researchers that actually are in the field, the prominence that they deserve, which would be, instead of documentaries and TV shows with actors, you'll have actual real researchers on documentaries with Amazon and Netflix.
Right.
People who actually know what's going on. They've seen what's going on. And though that influence combined with the influence of people like me and people who are podcasters who have huge audiences, it's like every piece of the puzzle is here to elevate the topic to where it needs to be. It's just somebody has to like put the pieces in place and start maneuvering things around, and then fight the little battles that need to be fought so it can get there. I think we'll get there, Doc. I'm telling you, I think we'll get there. It's just there's some sacred cows that we got to kill.
Yeah, along the way. There's quite a few of them. One of the big problems, I think, is the fear. Researchers are afraid to come out. They're afraid to say something. There's too much, authorities sitting everybody down and saying, "Oh, you saw a bear." That old routine, So people are afraid to really get out there and share things and to come together. I mean, we get together around the campfire and talk, but nobody wants to do it too publicly because they are afraid. And a perfect example of that is my second sighting with the two juveniles. I put out a report on it just at our table at the next conference. And this was a playground that has been there for years and years. And in recent years, they replaced some of the equipment with newer, better equipment. And right after my report came out, I had another researcher say, "Can you tell me the location of this? Because I'd like to go see where you had it." So I said, "Yeah, here it is." And I said, "When you get there and take some pictures of it, just for the heck of it, send me some pictures." Well, he did. And within 6 months of my sighting, the entire playground disappeared.
Oh, wow.
Yes, everything. And I don't mean they just pulled up the cemented posts and, put everything on a trailer and towed it away. It now has perfect lawn. And if you looked at it, you'd swear there was never a playground there.
Wow.
So
wow.
that leaves a lot of researchers a little nervous,
Yeah, but I'll tell you, Doc, was it Bill? It was Bill Barr, Jimmy Barr. I was talking to.
Jimmy Barr, yeah.
Jimmy showed me something that I think, if we look at it from a 30,000-foot view, when Jimmy showed me the actual hog hunting regulations in Florida, where they said that you couldn't take skunk apes in the actual hog hunting regulations, it tells you a couple of things, right? So it tells you, number one, that they know they exist, and Jimmy was right about that. But also, it kind of gives you a gauge of the amount of leeway you have as you deal with this topic. Now, of course, when you're dealing with the powers that be, there has to be a certain level of respect. But to me, there's a give and take relationship as it pertains to it. Because let's say I get a piece of research and I got a piece of evidence, and should there be a little bit of apprehension? Yes, right. But at the end of the day, technology has gotten to a point to where there's no way, like there's really no way they can control the information that gets out there. Um, and no way that they can control the flow of the information. Everything is going to be done in a reactive manner. So what you're telling me is that was a reaction to what you guys discovered, right? Um,
Correct.
and so if it's something that's reactive, it means that they have to wait until they get the information and react to it. Well, listen, if you guys already got it in the regulations that nobody can take a skunk ape, then where I'm going to start is what Jimmy did. Jimmy started talking about the regular. I'm just going to start talking about your regulation. All right, guys. So Bigfoot doesn't exist. What's a skunk ape? Here's what they're saying in the rules and regulations. So as it pertains to Florida, if somebody actually has some evidence of a skunk ape, I don't even understand why you're tripping on it because you've already disclosed that they exist in your rules and your regulations. I don't. To me, it makes no sense to harass a researcher when
Well, I
you've
agree.
already
It
proved.
doesn't, but I don't know. And I talked to Jimmy Barr, and I've been out with him a few times, and I've seen that report. He gave me a copy of it. It was interesting, you know. It's like the old Army Corps of Engineer report from what, back in the 70s out west. You know, they showed you locations where they had seen Bigfoot, and yet they don't exist. So it's very confusing if for the average person. They don't
Yeah,
know whether to believe in it or not to believe in it. The government says they don't exist, and yet here are reports that say they do. So people are nervous about it.
no, I agree with you. And I'll tell you how I've dealt with it in the past when I was contacted by a few groups. And all that happened after I went to Coast AM and I talked about I talked about all kind of stuff I just went off. Like I told all the business, right?
Hmm.
And my conversation I had with them was just real simple. Listen, there's no need for threats. There's no need for any of the crazy foolishness because at the end of the day, I'm going to continue to talk about what I'm talking about. I'm the guy that you sit down and have a conversation with and try and decipher what you guys are trying to accomplish versus what our field is trying to accomplish. And when you talk to certain people, it's not necessarily they don't want to disclose it, it's that they want to control the rate of the disclosure because they can't control the disclosure. For example, if you go on TikTok right now, there are hundreds of videos of Bigfoots, werewolf looking like creatures. There's everything out there. So they know they can't control whether it's going to be disclosed or not. It's like they want to control the rate of that disclosure, the speed of that disclosure. And I guess that's for a certain being held for a certain time period where it has, I don't know, maybe it's a massive distraction, kind of like what's going on with the UFOs now. But they know
Right.
they can't control the disclosure. It's impossible. Technology won't allow that to happen. So I think a lot of the apprehension and fear is um, it may be a little bit more than what people need to have at this point in time. Um, Unless you just got a body. Like if you went and took a shot one and took a body and you trying to just walk down the street with it and show it to everybody, you got a problem on your hands, bro. You're not getting away with that. That's just not. That's not
That's
happening.
for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, that's not happening. I can tell you that. That's
No,
that's gonna be a problem.
that would be. Now, I had one other interesting thing happen. Well, several, but one time I was literally walked out of the forest by a Bigfoot that I couldn't see. What happened? I was on a favorite trail of mine in the middle of the summer. Really enjoyed the trail. It wasn't a scary place. Uh, I ran across a adolescent Bigfoot track, and I thought, well, it's not a bear. I checked it out. There was only one. It was crossing a bit of a sandy dirt trail, and I went down on my knees and I photographed it and I measured it and I checked it all out, but I didn't have my casting kit. It was maybe 2 miles back at the car. So when I stood up, I suddenly became ill. And I mean, like, I'm talking a couple of nanoseconds. And I didn't know what was hitting me. I'd never been hit by infrasound before. And I just kind of stood there wondering what was going on. And I did have enough presence of mind to hit the record button on my video recorder. I held it on the monopod right against my body, and I just slowly did a 360, very, very slowly, and trying to find something, if there was anything out there. And I couldn't find anything. And by the time I did the full circle, and I looked down at the track and I looked around a little bit more, I was getting hit more and more with infrasound. And suddenly I got scared. Then the fear really set in. And like I said, I'd never been afraid out there, and certainly not in the middle of the day. So I suddenly had that urge to leave. And I think they walked me out the whole 2 miles because the intensity never let up. So something was walking with me, and I kept looking back. I couldn't see it. And when I got around that last little turn in the trail, my car was about 50 feet, and instantly it went away. The fear left, the infrasound left, the sickness left. I just felt great, and I'm standing there looking around and saying, why did I do that? Why did I leave? And that was, it took me a little while. I, went to the car, sat down, had a sandwich and a glass of water, drink of water. And I thought about it. I said, well, I guess I know what infrasound is all about now. That was an interesting experience.
I can validate that experience. When we had a camera project, one of our researchers, James Tucker, right before that camera project fell apart, he went out into the field to do an investigation. And I know he got hit with infrasound because he came back in. He was having a nosebleed, and he had verbalized that he was going to go further out into the woods. He got hit with something, and he just came back inside. It was like his mind got changed. He just walked back inside and got on the internet, and everybody's like, I thought you were supposed to be doing this. And he was like, I don't know why I did it. Then he slept for like 20 hours after that. Like, he was just out for 20 hours. So it's something about that infrasound. I think that's how they do something to our brains with that sound that forces us to change our mind. Or maybe it's like a hard reset of the mind in some kind of way, shape, or form. But it just makes the person stop doing what they're doing. It makes them feel sick in that moment. But then after that, it's like, okay, why did I just do that? It's almost like the person goes through brain fog for a little while. And then when they come out, they're trying to figure out, okay, well, why did I do that? Mm-hmm. And plenty of my eyewitnesses that call me and tell me their stories, they've experienced the same thing. And here's another piece of data that I found in common. It happens a lot in areas where it's kind of like the place has been habituated, like if it's on a person's property and they frequent that property a lot. It's like when they don't want that homeowner there and they don't want to go through the process of scaring them off, they hit them with infrasound. The homeowner goes into the house. And sometimes it's described as just, I just went inside. Other times it's described as they're being made afraid or they get hit with fear. It's different effects. So maybe it's different frequencies that have different effects on people. I don't know. Or for all we know, it could be somebody shooting you with a satellite. But all I know is what you said is exactly what people have reported.
Okay. I found it very interesting. And I was thinking after, about what happened that day. And they may have been watching. They may have saw me find one of their adolescent footprints. And maybe that was enough to make me have to leave,
Mm-hmm.
That may
it would make sense.
Yeah, maybe Mama said, you're not getting that close to my little girl or the little boy.
Mm-hmm.
You're out of here.
Yep. All right, well, Dr. Bill, we up on the hour. Here's what I want you to do for me. Tell everybody how they can support you, where they can go to find your work, if they wanted to donate, if they want to buy a product, if they wanted to do something to put some money in your pocket so you can continue doing your research. Where do they need to go?
Okay, right here. I hope you do that video and show show some of us something, that we need to learn.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So you got a Facebook, you got a Twitter, you got a YouTube. How do they get in contact with you?
Either text or Facebook. Facebook is good. I'm on there.
So they can look you up on Facebook and they can get in contact with you. Well, I am going to do that video as it pertains to the research and the funding. I text her while I was talking to you. I'm waiting on a response to her. Then I found two other people that are pretty decent sized YouTubers who talk about grants. So I had my producer reach out to them. And, in my mind, the way it starts off is where do you go find the grant? And then how do you do a grant proposal? The proposal is easier to me than just finding the grant. It's finding the grant that suits your needs. The proposal is something that you can outsource. You can get a proposal for $50, $100 based on your team. So we're definitely going to do it, Doc. You got my word. We're going to make it happen. And I appreciate you joining me, my friend. I really do.
Okay. My pleasure.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you are enjoying Bigfoot Weekend, and there's much more coming your way.